think that every delivery manager knows that strange experience of running a sprint that appears to be perfect on the surface, that stand-ups that happen on time, the board looks very active, the burn-down chart slopes in the right general direction, the ceremonies all occur, the artifacts exist, yet something isn't right and the results are not very good. And I've seen this across many organizations and in teams that were not necessarily dysfunctional. They weren't lazy, they weren't inexperienced either. In fact, they were doing everything by the book, but still nothing was really being delivered properly. And this has led to a multitude of posts on LinkedIn to state that Agile is dead. Industry research points to the same pattern. Around 70% of Agile transformations fail to meet their goals. And McKinsey recently reported that 2/3 of organizations feel like they're merely treading water with Agile rather than swimming. So we've established the symptom, poor results from Agile. However, the cause is not so obvious. And it's not so obvious because it's deeper, it's structural, and it's often very invisible. So having all those outwardly facing ceremonies and artifacts in place often hides actually the cause of this symptom of poor delivery using Agile. So rather than state Agile is dead, as many people love to do on LinkedIn, I'm going to walk you through the 7 hidden patterns, the 7 sprint pathologies that are the cause of the symptom of poor results from Agile. In my upcoming book, I frame delivery in terms of 5 rings: earth, water, fire, wind, and void. These rings reveal where sprints are cracking, where the flow is stalled, and where energy is burnt out, where the direction is spinning, or where culture has gone silent. I'm going to frame the patterns I'm talking about today as within these 5 rings. It's a bit of an intro to my book, but also I think it's really the best way to look at delivery. So let's get into them. A series of patterns that explains why so many sprints are working, but not working. Pattern number 1, the first pathology, is the collapse of the earth ring, the foundation of trust, clarity, and a meaningful process. This is when Agile rituals continue long after their substance died. I once worked on a project where stand-ups have become just pure routine. We all stood in a circle, we said our lines, the meeting ended, but the blockers that desperately needed surfacing never appeared. The ceremony existed, but collaboration and the meaning behind it didn't. And this is really Agile at its most fragile. The outer form will remain intact, but the inner foundations have just rotted away. You might have heard this being referred to as Agile theatre. Teams performing and the motions of agility without the behaviors that give those motions any meaning. And once the foundation collapses, the rest of the sprint builds on cracked ground. The team will take comfort in routine, but the routine will conceal that systemic rot. When the earth is weak, the sprint is already lost before the work even begins. Pattern number 2 belongs to fire, the team's energy, morale, sustainable pace. Most teams don't notice when this energy turns into wildfire. In one team I worked in, developers were pulling 60+ hour weeks, sprint after sprint. Initially, it felt very heroic. The team was just pushing through to a goal. The adrenaline was running high, the velocity numbers looked strong. But as we know, fire that burns too hot eventually consumes the people holding it. By the 3rd or 4th sprint, the cracks appeared, rework increased, quality dropped, tension rose, and burnout became not a possibility, but an inevitability. Dora's research warns exactly about this. The constant move fast and pivot mentality harms developers, harms their well-being, and ultimately harms performance. A sprint that depends on a superhuman effort isn't a sprint, it's a countdown clock, and a countdown clock to burnout. And the thing is, when fire collapses, you don't just lose the energy, you lose the psychological space you need for innovation, resilience, and clarity. A burnt team will produce burnt work. All right, next pattern, number 3. Nothing derails a sprint faster than misaligned incentives because the team just stops moving forward as one. This is a win failure, the collapse of direction. I saw this vividly in a project I worked in where QA teams were rewarded for finding bugs, meaning they flagged even trivial issues just to hit the targets. Meanwhile, product managers were incentivized by feature completion, pushing the team to close stories rapidly, while engineers were optimized for performance and stability. Each group believed that they were doing the right thing, but the win ring, the shared direction, was beginning to crack. Scrum.org tells the same story. Misaligned KPIs turn collaboration into a tug-of-war. The sprint becomes a battlefield of competing agendas rather than a unified push towards user value. When the wind loses its North Star, effort becomes motion without movement. Misalignment is always a slow motion catastrophe. All right, pattern number 4. Some teams fail not because they shout, but because they stop speaking to one another. This is the void pathology, the cultural collapse when the unspoken becomes dangerous. In an initiative I was working with, a junior developer discovered a critical bug before demo but chose not to raise it. Fear, uncertainty, lack of psychological safety had created this atmosphere where silence was safer than truth. You'll know this when stand-ups become monologues, when retrospectives just become polite exchanges, when people withhold what the project needs to hear. This means that the void ring has just hollowed out. Dora consistently shows that strong, supportive cultures reduce burnout and improve performance. The absence of safety turns every sprint into a minefield. Blockers remain buried, risks remain hidden, and the team loses its ability to adapt because the information needed to adapt is locked in the minds of people who are too afraid to speak. Silence is really the most dangerous blocker of all. So the fifth pathology emerges when the sprint becomes obsessed with motion rather than meaning. This is a water failure, the disruption of flow. I've seen sprint boards filled with done tickets while user adoption remained flat or even declined. Teams which were celebrating story points, throughput, or daily velocity, but never really paused to see if the work actually mattered. The classic feature factory syndrome, the mistaken belief that output equals value. One very famous Agile coach called metrics like velocity vanity metrics, unless it's tied to customer outcomes. In practice, when a team focuses on closing slices of work rather than delivering anything that changes the user's world, water becomes turbulent, the flow stagnates, the sprint fills with activity, but there's no value. And when water loses its coherence, this means that the sprint has become a treadmill. You have lots of motion, but no real progress. Right, pattern number 6. The sixth pathology is another earth collapse. This is when the backlog becomes too concrete. In a local council project I supported, the roadmap was frozen for an entire year. By the time the team had delivered the planned features, the policy landscape, the user behaviors had moved on entirely. The work was done, but the world had changed. The team was forbidden to adapt because the roadmap said they had to stay on course. And it was a tragic misreading of what Agile was actually supposed to do. McKinsey research shows that many organizations stagnate with Agile because they refuse to change direction when needed, the basis of Agile. They lock down scope and treat deviation as a failure rather than learning, totally against what Agile represents. The earth ring then becomes brittle, the sprint loses its agility, and the backlog, instead of guiding that team, will imprison the team onto a path to failure. The key thing to note here is that adaptation is not scope creep. The final pathology is one which every engineer knows all too well. Technical debt accumulating like rot under the surface, slowly weakening the entire structure of delivery. On one AI platform that I built, every sprint included a little hack. At first it felt manageable, but over time it really became catastrophic. Features started to slow down, bugs multiplied, innovation really stalled, and everything the team tried to build collapsed under the weight of that unresolved debt. McKinsey found that 64% of teams say that technical debt significantly limits their ability to achieve goals, and nearly half say it slows their time to market. Technical debt isn't just a bit of code that needs fixing. It's a tax on future velocity. It's the earth collapsing beneath your feet. A sprint can survive a bad story. It can even survive shifting requirements, but it can't survive crumbling foundations. So these 7 pathologies explain why so many sprints look agile, but really fail to produce any meaningful outcomes. The ceremonies alone can't save you. The tools can't save you. The backlog can't save you. But what saves you is understanding where the system is cracking. Is it earth, water, fire, wind, void, and restoring that balance before that collapse takes place. If this resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe. Share your own experiences below. Which one of these patterns have you seen in your teams? Which pathologies are silently shaping your sprints right now? Look out for the book. I'll speak to you next time. And as always, stay agile.